Thank you. Thank you, Director. I've met you already in Brussels just a few weeks back when we discussed this very issue. And one of the things at that discussion, I remember you saying that up to 2040, that a lot of the requirements for draining peatlands could be met by, the peatlands could be met by perhaps areas that were already afforested or other types of drained peatlands. I mistakenly thought that that meant 50%, but of course it actually means 30, and you clarified that today, that it's just exclusively to 2030 that are the requirements from this proposed regulation. And I think that's a really important point, but I'll come back to that in a minute, that the requirements could be met by looking at our drained peatlands and areas under afforestation, peaty lands, if indeed the government were to decide to do that. But this is a draft regulation, and I think it's important that we recognise that this is not a final document and will be shaped by the Parliament and the Council over the next period of time. And I think that is where certainly there can be influence, and perhaps the final document may not be the same document as we have here. It will not be, but how different it will be remains to be seen. Can I ask you just briefly, first of all, what countries objected to this draft proposal when it was put forward in the public domain? And are those countries still maintaining objections? Just who are they, and are they still maintaining them?
Well, let me first, yes, reconfirm, and thank you for reminding me that I did have the occasion to meet with Irish farmers some weeks ago here in Brussels, and we were with them. And indeed, I can reconfirm from the figures I have, it's of course a national option, but for sure this target of 30% restoration by 2030 on drained peatlands, a quarter of which should be directed, could be attained by non-agriculture land, depending on Irish choices. I'm not sure for the target up to 2050, which is 70%, half of which wetted, but for sure for 2030 and the good part of it, 2040, is, as I said, an Irish decision because the flexibility is ingrained in the proposal. Yes, you're very right that, of course, the final outcome, well, actually, whatever piece of legislation, it's always different from what the Commission proposed. We did not decide. It's the Parliament and the Council to decide in the negotiations where we are also a part. But on objections, first let me remind you that the call for binding targets for restoration came from the Council. Several Council conclusions related to climate and biodiversity actually called for that, and also from the Parliament. There are many decisions, resolutions from the Parliament actively requesting for several kinds of ecosystems binding targets. So in that sense, we have followed requests by both co-legislators. Now, Member States' objections. As far as I'm informed, there's no Member State with a formal position of fully objecting to the proposal. All Member States have some concerns, some observations, and some questions they raise on Article X, Article Z. So I don't have here the full list of what each Member State says on each aspect. Of course, for some, drained peatlands is an issue. For some marine issues, restoration is an issue.
I asked a straightforward question, what countries raised objections and if they were still standing. So from your response, can I assume that a number, maybe even a significant number of Member States have raised concerns about different articles in the regulation, and obviously they still stand? If I'm not correct, you can come back to me on that.
You are correct, with one addition. They are all supporting it. They are all supporting the proposal with some requests, concerns or observations on specific articles.
Yes, that's correct, including Ireland. Did Ireland raise concerns about any of the articles, if you're aware of that?
Well, I'm sure, I don't have the list with me to be honest, but I'm sure, of course, on our dialogue with Ireland, drained peatlands have come up. Probably urban targets have come up, not as an objection, but as a concern on this aspect or that, and others.
So
probably
what you're saying is that
with me.
as far as you know, Ireland did not raise specific objections on this. And if you want to come back with a further word on that when you've had a look at it, I'd be delighted to see it. What I wanted to ask you was about the impact assessment. I mean, you've done it at European level, but you mentioned the Netherlands, and that's another example. You have Finland, Sweden and Ireland. In many ways, they're not typical of much of the land across the EU. So the impact assessment looks at the entire EU. So that's a crucial aspect, because this legislation will impact some member states, not just Ireland, some member states quite significantly. And it is simply good legislation when everything is informed by a proper impact assessment. And I haven't read it, but I will. And my concern is that it is not perhaps, or I'm asking, is it detailed enough? Does it look at the impact, not on specific member states or specific regions, but is there enough there that member states can be satisfied that the impact assessment that you have carried out, that you're standing over, is such that they can be satisfied that the impact overall on agriculture and other aspects of this legislation will not be negative?
Yes, member states can be reassured that we have done a very thorough impact assessment. And let me state one issue. We do look to the entire EU, but we have looked into specific ecosystem types. And we often hear, oh yes, my country has more of this than others, which is true, for instance, peatlands, not only Ireland. Germany has the largest absolute amount, Poland the second largest. We know about Netherlands, Finland, Ireland, on peatland, and we have figures on peatland. But then if you look to marine targets, of course, I expect my own member state, which is Portugal, to have much more to do than Austria, that has coasts to begin with. So overall, it's relatively evenly spread, the efforts that are required, if you take into account the very different situation, the different ecosystem types in different member states. But we do have figures including on cost per capita, and we know on some member states they will be higher than for others, but at the same time, costs are costs, but they are also investment in the sense that the benefits can also be higher when you do restore more. So do take a thorough look to the impact assessment. In case of any doubt, we are pleased to provide comments or references.
I will do that. My final point is, I suppose, two things briefly. You talked about consultation. Look, I spent 15 years in the European Parliament and I know how it works. There's no consultation on the percentage of areas. That's already decided. The targets are there. The drained peatlands, we know where they are, so there's no consultation on that. There'll be a lot of box ticking and there'll be meetings, but at the end of the day, the decisions that are already in place are what will stand. But the other comment that was made by a number of colleagues here today about putting people off land, and as you quite rightly said, that's not the Commission's intention, and I agree with you. But the truth is, Director, it will be the outcome of this legislation in certain areas and in certain places, because a significant percentage of Irish drained peatland will be re-wetted, and that means that in those areas then you are looking at people not being able to stay on the land. So there'll be no Commission official waving a document at somebody, but it will be the outcome in certain places. And I think, you know, you're a European citizen, so am I. There's lots of European citizens who are concerned about this, and we do need to be fair and reasonable and not say that none of this will impact people who are already farming, and none of this will put people off land, because it actually will, and you know that as well as I do.
Yes, there will be, there are societal changes in the expectations that will impact many sectors. fisheries, agriculture, forestry, infrastructure, energy, all will be impacted from the transformative change needed necessarily to deal with climate change. But one thing I can tell you, first, if you take out the nature restoration law as such, you still have a rewetting issue to tackle from other targets, including Irish targets. And second, what I'm saying is that no one will need to be out of anything depending on the member states' decisions, because there's wide room of flexibility, including for Ireland on its specific situation. So no, I don't think that we are putting people at risk. We are concerning people, that I understand. All transitions and transformations does bring change and difficulties. That's why there is a just transition concept in the Green Deal. But on consultations, first of all, let me tell you, when we propose whatever we do as Commission, obligatorily we consult.
I understand all of that, Director. I know how the system works.
Support from public opinion towards the nature restoration law.
Yeah.
And just to finalize, we have put provisions that requests that member states must consult the public.
I know
and further
how it
than
works.
that, you know, there is something called the Horus Convention that does give a lot of assurance to public consultation overall, legally.